Perfect. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Thanks for joining us for day 2 of this training. Again, we know December is super busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time to spend a couple mornings with us, and hopefully you'll have some good takeaways from these 2 days. Just some quick logistical reminders before we get started. These are the same as yesterday. We're recording. Please mute yourself when you're not talking so that we can limit some of the background noise. Sounds like we've got a lot of dogs on the line this morning. So while we always love the pet sightings, if you could just mute when you're not talking, that would be helpful. Obviously, use the chat or raise your hand if you have questions or comments, and we will get to those as we see them. If you wouldn't mind renaming yourself if it didn't hold over from yesterday with just your first and last name so we have an idea of who's on the line. And then if you are joining with separate devices, if you could go ahead and link your phone and your video account so when we're doing the breakout groups, we get everybody assigned appropriately, that would be really helpful. So quick overview of today's agenda. We're going to really dive into meeting design and facilitation today. So the first half of the meeting, we're going to talk about some different meeting design techniques, particularly focused on virtual meetings right now. We're going to share some sample agendas with you and some different things to think about to get some interactive exercises going and things like that. And then we're going to do an exercise revisiting yesterday's scenario and really dive into planning the meeting that we were talking about and goal setting for yesterday. And then the second half, we're going to focus more on facilitation and some of the things that might come up there and facilitation planning and thinking through your plan Bs and different things like that. And then we will wrap up and leave you all with some resources. And just a quick note on that, we will send everything out and or upload it all to the Google Drive link that we sent you. We'll upload the PowerPoint, some sample facilitation plans, the recording of the 2 days, and some other resources for you all. So keep an eye out for an email from us in the next week or so with all of the materials from this training as well. So to kick us off this morning, we did ask you this yesterday, and I don't think we saw any come in, but if you have any questions from yesterday or anything that came up after the training, please drop those into the chat box now, and we will address those as best we can this morning. And while you all are doing that, Hannah and I just wanted to share a couple of different ways to address questions when you're doing these things over 2 days, and or if you're just trying to think of different ways to handle questions in a virtual environment and or in person. So those of you that attended our tiers training late last year will recognize this top part. When we come back for day 2 for our tiers training, we ask everybody to write their questions on big sticky notes. And then we go through as a training team and kind of group them and answer the questions real time as we can. Usually there's some themes there, but we just physically have people write questions on sticky notes and move them around and address them as you can. In a virtual environment, there are a couple of platforms that do something similar, and we'll show you one of these a little bit later today and how they can be used in a virtual environment. But there is a way to do virtual sticky notes to take questions and make sure that they're captured. Something that's not on here is there's also a whiteboard option on some of these platforms, including Zoom, that you can use to actually physically take notes to capture people's questions or comments. And then those of you that were part of the Complete Communities workshop a little bit earlier this year will obviously also recognize how we usually handle webinar questions. So we usually moderate those, have them come into kind of a back channel to our staff so that, again, we can weed out anything that might be super inflammatory, group similar questions, address anything that doesn't necessarily need to be answered to the full group, around tech issues or things like that. Or we can send notes back out to everybody if we're getting a lot of questions, say about the recording or about the slide deck or anything like that. So we usually have dedicated staff on the back end of our virtual meetings to handle that. Today we've got Carly and Nicole kind of helping us weed through the questions that come in to the chat box here so that the people that are presenting can focus a little bit more on that. The only thing I'll note on this is there are a lot of options on how to handle these types of questions, so just to consider the staffing and time implications. So for example, with our webinars, that's a whole other dedicated person that we have on those. And so sometimes it's not always it's not always, you're not always able to have an additional staff member attend some of those things. So just think through the time and the staff that are needed to handle some of these.
I wonder if we can go back to the previous slide and maybe take a pause for just one moment and see if people can type in any questions in the chat box. We have about 30 participants and 0 questions. Either we did an outstanding job yesterday, or we just need a moment for those questions to come in.
Looking like an outstanding job. I don't see any more questions in the chat box.
Well, this is also a standing offer here. Obviously, we talked about a little earlier. If you have questions as we're talking today or during any of the time this morning, just put them in the chat box at any time, and either our team on the back end will answer them, or we will answer them live. So we've got a lot to cover today. So, we do now have a question, perhaps? I see it blinking.
Yes, I see there are a number of regular projects that only have one staff assigned to attend, facilitate, present, and to be the main person for Q&A. So that's just an acknowledgement, I think, of the capacity issues that sometimes local governments face. And do we have solutions for that?
No, that is really challenging, and as somebody who's done all of those things at meetings, it's really hard to be the only one on the team. So I definitely can sympathize and empathize with being in that situation. Unfortunately, I don't have any great tools there, other than if you have access to even interns or other staff that might be able to jump in and help. Sometimes you can tap, depending on the group that you're working with, sometimes you can tap somebody that's attending the meeting to help. So if you're working with CBOs that you have really good relationships with, you could definitely tap them to perhaps help take notes, or to help flip chart, or to do things like that real time at some of these meetings. Hannah, do you have any other thoughts on how to address some of those capacity issues if you're the only staff member?
In a way, yes, it's challenging to be the only one, definitely. But I wonder, depending on the situation, is this like additional meeting design planning, just maybe for the one person, can help to alleviate some of the challenges?
Great.
Yeah, simplifying your plan would definitely try not to do anything crazy if you're the only person there, probably.
Great. And we do have one more from Tanner. Given the success in terms of attendance for the virtual engagement in a post-COVID world, do you envision in-person, virtual, hybrid engagement scenarios?
I would say yes. We're hearing that from a lot of our partners that work with local government agencies, as they're pursuing hybrid options, even for conferences and things like that, where there will be in-person content as well as virtual content. I definitely see communities getting used to this virtual engagement and the ease at which that they can attend public meetings. So I definitely think there's going to be an appetite for continued virtual engagement, or a hybrid option, whether that's streaming meetings so that people can attend, or recording things so that they can be watched after the fact, or even just having options for people to engage or comment on things in both an in-person and virtual environment, through email or through other platforms or things like that. Hannah, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, actually, along your line, you answered the question.
And I just want to jump in with one thing, as we've seen in schools, teachers are starting to go back and trying to do the hybrid. Just be careful, because when you do that at the same time, you're usually playing to either one audience or another. So either you're focused on your virtual audience, or you're focused on your audience there. So just be careful that one of the audience isn't kind of being neglected during that engagement.
No, that's a really good point, Carly. And one thing to think through is just having a mix of types of interactions. So if you're looking at longer public engagement processes, having those online options as well as the in-person options. So So maybe you're not trying to split your focus on the explicit meeting that you're working on. But I think there's a lot of options here, unfortunately, and we're all just going to kind of have to navigate it real time and figure out how we do this. And because I also don't think, at least from where we sit in Northern California, that everything's just going to open up at one time. So I think there's going to be a slow rollout, and we're going to have to figure out how to navigate that hybrid approach and smaller in-person meetings, and still perhaps larger virtual engagement opportunities when that needs to be an option as well.
Okay, moving along. Thank you for your questions. So let's continue discussing how do we design those effective meetings that increase participation, create more satisfactory participatory outcomes, and help you to achieve your public engagement goals. So yesterday we've talked about setting the stage and how important it is. And if you're asking Melissa and Hannah, why we talk 2 hours about setting a stage? Well, it's very important to be clear on all the meeting goals, intended outcomes, thinking through all these different items that you guys thought through in your exercise. We started talking about some digital tools and interactive techniques, what can help you to achieve your goals and also make meeting more interactive and more positive participant experience. And we demonstrated a lot of techniques already yesterday by unveiling what we call behind the curtain. And today we continue talking about meeting design. I'm going to share a couple more techniques, and we'll talk about facilitation. Once you've done all this planning work, how to actually facilitate these meetings and what can go wrong. Next slide, please. And why is it important? Why is it so important to be intentional about your meeting design? Almost 70% of you mentioned on the survey yesterday, on Meeting Sit survey, that you see increase in participation. You also mentioned some of the challenges that it's hard actually to get in people participate, keeping meeting on tracks. There's always some tech issues. It's hard to have a real discussion. All in all, when people attend the meeting and they leave the meeting and they're like, well, that was not good, and they didn't do anything with my feedback, I'm not coming back. And a lot of government meetings, they have these typical attributes that people are not big fans of. It does not create positive experience. Location usually was some government location, very unfamiliar in this virtual environment. Now technology is intimidating. People don't use Zoom every day. And when they get into Zoom meetings, webinars, they're like, I don't know how to use that technology, how to participate. Room setup for our in-person meetings, the room setup did not really support the dialogue. People were sitting in rows and there's just talking at people. In online design, again, there's a lot of presentation on lectures and talking at people and very little dialogue. Presentation, often too detailed, technical, and long. We hear that over and over again, and it's hard sometimes to simplify that language, but we have to try. Microphone for in-person meeting used to be in front of the room. It's not very welcoming. It's a little intimidating walking to the front of the room. Well, now what's happening in the virtual environment is by default, we keep all the participants on mute, and sometimes it's necessary. Again, going back to design of the meeting, but all in all, it's not very welcoming. And public waits a long time to speak, and they speak for the very short time. Or all in all, it's not the best, meeting designs, and people are just not satisfied with participating in these meetings. So what can we do differently? Well, hopefully we're demonstrating to you already a lot of techniques, how you can design your meeting a little bit differently, and let's continue learning together.
Something else to consider as you're designing your meetings, and I think this is particularly important in a virtual environment, because we default to kind of talking at people and having a PowerPoint on the screen and hoping that they absorb that information. But there are different types of learners, and so we would love to have 4 volunteers here. We've got 4 different learning styles. So if I have a volunteer, otherwise I will pick who I can see on my screen. Any takers for the visual learners section?
I don't mind reading it.
Perfect.
Okay, visual learners. Visual learners are those who learn things best through seeing them. Visual learners often prefer to sit in the front of the room and watch the lecture presentation closely. Often these people will find that confusing information makes more sense when it is explained with the aid of a chart or picture.
Thanks, Tanner. Do I have a volunteer to read the tactile learners section?
I can read that.
Thank you.
Tactile or kinesthetic learners are those who learn through experiencing or doing things. For this reason, tactile learners may become bored more quickly than others while listening to a lecture. To remember a phone number, tactile learners may remember the pattern of their fingers as they press the numbers.
Great, thank you, Samira. How about auditory learners?
I can do that. Auditory learner is a phrase used to describe people who tend to retain information more thoroughly when the information is reinforced through sounds. Auditory learning methods could include anything from musical notes to voice recordings or chants.
All right, and thank you, Vicki. And our last one is reading and writing learners. Any volunteers there?
I will. Reading and writing learners prefer to take any information displayed as words. Learning materials that are binary and text-based are strongly preferred by these learners. These learners might like to take notes.
Great, thank you, Alejandra. And now we're going to do a quick Zoom poll, hopefully, to get a sense of how all of you learn. Kim, can you launch our poll, please? Great, thanks. Hopefully you can all see that pop up. So if you could just take a second to flag which one of those resonates most with you. And some people connect with more than one of those, but if you had to pick one, which one do you feel like you most are? We'll get this just a second.
Okay,
We have 27 of 31 who have responded, so just a few left.
Oh, it's probably us, Kim.
Oh yeah, okay, well then we're probably good. Then let me share the results.
Thank you. Great. So you see the breakdown there, about 15% said auditory, 11 said reading and writing, 70% said visual, and 4% said tactile. So going back to what Hannah was just talking about in terms of the meeting design for a lot of public meetings, those are really mainly targeted at auditory learners. You have a lot of verbal presentations. Sometimes you definitely have visuals that go along with that, but it's usually a lot of talking at people and may not take into account some of those other types of learning styles. So we flagged this for you just to make sure you're thinking about this as you design your meetings. So in addition to perhaps verbal reports or presentations, think about having things visuals, whether that's, obviously you can have aids of PowerPoint slides, but also think about handouts or maps or charts or graphs or things like that that could represent that information in a visual way. For the tactile piece, when we do in-person training, sometimes we'll have things out on the tables that people can be like pipe cleaners, or I've seen Legos sometimes, or just things that people can be, quote, playing with their hands, if that's how they learn, so they can be doing something while they're listening. And then with reading and writing, this is also just to maybe have a summary of the meeting for people to react to, or a workbook that they can be working through if it's a longer meeting and you're looking for feedback, but having some of that information written down so that they can absorb it in the way that is most beneficial for them. So this is just something to think about as you think through the components of your meeting design. So going back to yesterday, we really talked through the goals of the meetings and what you're trying to achieve and who might be there. and some of those big picture components. So we're going to take the next few minutes to talk about some of the techniques and tips, particularly as it relates to virtual meetings that you can be thinking about. Yesterday, you guys flagged that lack of interaction or engagement in meetings has been a challenge for you, particularly, I think, in this virtual environment. So these are some of the things that we use on a regular basis to try to keep people engaged when we're doing online meetings and trainings and things like that. Obviously, we demonstrated a number of these yesterday, and we'll continue to model some of those for you today. But think through things like surveys or polls. So we've shown you 2 different types of polling that can be used online, in person, in that meeting. Zoom obviously has their own polling function that we just used, and then we used Meetingshift yesterday, and we'll use it a little bit later today as well. If you're using GoToWebinar, it also has its own polling option, but pretty much anything that's internet-based, in my experience, you can use in virtual meetings. Keeping people in a large group and having them share or popcorn report out. Thinking through softball opening questions. So yesterday when we did the Meetingshift, we started with a question about caffeine. So usually it's a good idea to have a kind of a quote softball opening question that gets people used to the technology or gets them used to participating instead of jumping right into some of the more difficult and challenging questions that you might have for them. Having small group exercises. So we did that yesterday, and we'll do that again in a little bit today as well. And then having report outs from those. So that is a strategy to get folks to talk that may not be comfortable talking in front of, 30 plus people, but they're okay in a 4 to 5 person group. So it's definitely a way to encourage more voices and more thoughts there. Icebreakers. We did this a little bit yesterday in the introductions by asking you about the public engagement piece and what that means to you. But there's a lot of different icebreakers, and we can, if you're interested in learning more about virtual icebreakers, I think Hannah and I had a website that we were looking at to try to get some ideas there. We're happy to share that. You can do digital typing or digital charting or a typed out report. I did this in my small group yesterday. I had the template up and was taking notes real time. But again, there's also a whiteboard function on Zoom. And there's other ways to capture that information in a virtual environment that you may have done on flip charts or on a screen in front of the room while you were doing in-person meetings. So this is just a really good way of capturing, make sure you're capturing and visually showing people that you're writing down their thoughts or their ideas. In my experience, and I'm sure in all of yours, if somebody doesn't feel heard or doesn't feel like their thought has been captured, they will continue to repeat it and oftentimes get louder in the process. So making sure that you actually have a visual place that you're capturing that information can be really helpful when you're dealing with certain types of individuals. Word clouds is another way to capture ideas. We showed you that in meetings yesterday. A parking lot, again, this is something we would usually do in in-person meetings, but if somebody has an idea or a thought that's off topic of what the meeting is about, but you want to capture it and make sure, again, that they're feeling heard, we often use a parking lot and have ideas there, and we're going to show you a virtual way to do that in just a bit. And then there's also a number of games that you can use in virtual meetings. So those are just some of the techniques. And then we're just going to also share with you some tips that we have come across as we do this, again, in a virtual environment. First and foremost, Hannah mentioned this a little bit ago, but make sure you explain the platform up front. Your attendees may not be as comfortable or as well-versed in some of these platforms as you all are. I don't think everybody spends their life on Zoom like some of us feel like we're doing these days. So make sure you explain the platform, how they can engage appropriately, what that etiquette is, should they be muted, how can they ask a question, all of that type of thing is really important to do up front.
Yeah, and along these lines with explaining the platform, you can start the meeting. You can tell them people to log in 15 minutes early if they need a quick tour about the platform, or you can set a separate workshop how to use the platform, or have a separate webinar recorded and encourage people to watch this webinar and test all the Zoom controls before coming to your meeting. The next one, virtual meeting design techniques, is no lecture more than 10 or 15 minutes. Try to mix your activities, and we try to demonstrate that yesterday, mixing lecture, polling, small groups, large group share, all that.
This next one we just talked about, so just make sure you're considering those learning styles and designing your meeting so that it's the information can be absorbed by lots of different types of attendees.
Use visuals. 70% on the Zoom poll and said you're visual learners, and we cannot emphasize how helpful visuals are. If you can look at our PowerPoint, which we spent a tremendous amount of hours putting together, we tried to make it very visual, very simple, lots of boxes. There's no death by bullet point, what I call. It's very interactive.
And then also let the audience share their story. So particularly in engagement activities, you're looking to hear from them. You're looking for feedback from them in a lot of instances. So make sure you have that space available to let your audience talk instead of just talking at them.
Yeah, we cannot emphasize that enough. We've seen in public engagement, especially in your first kick-off meetings where people are not ready to jump into some type of solution or share feedback, create that space for just storytelling, especially around some contentious issues where there's a lot of past grievances and past histories. That space in the long run will benefit your engagement process. And consider language access needs. Again, going back to your audience, who are you planning, who do you think gonna attend meetings? Do you have translation set up? How it's gonna work? Definitely to create this inclusive participation.
And related to the last point I made about the audience speaking, just ensure that you have multiple voices. So we're obviously modeling that here. Hannah and I are ping-ponging this particular slide, but we've also had others on our team talk, have invited all of you to share. So it's helpful to not have people tune out what you're saying. And in in-person meetings, what I would add to this is also move around the room. So not only have different voices talk, but try to talk at different spaces in the room so that people are moving around a little bit to look at the speaker instead of just staring at one screen or staring at one podium for the whole time if possible.
Yes, definitely creating space for those comments and questions, whether it's the burning questions, spaces that are more inviting. Sometimes people need a quiet time and write all these questions instead of waiting for 3 minutes at the microphone.
And then lastly, we spent some time talking about this yesterday, but choosing the quote right platform. So again, thinking through what all of your needs are. Do you need translation? Do you need to be able to do breakout groups? Do you need to be able to have more control of the audience and when they speak? Making sure that you're really aware of what all of your needs are from a meeting design perspective before you jump into picking your platform so that you can make sure that it has all of the attributes that you need. And then something we just wanted to flag for you guys, because this came up yesterday and some of your challenges as well in terms of access and technology. So we just wanted to spend a couple of minutes here talking about some of the digital engagement challenges that we've seen from some of our local government partners. You guys did flag that you're seeing more engagement in the virtual environment, but I would suspect that there's probably segments of your population that these challenges apply to. The first is just the digital divide and the access to the internet and broadband, and that as a barrier to participating in online meetings. The workaround we've seen on this front is some cities and counties that we've worked with have actually partnered with CBOs that can provide hotspots or other internet access points, because this is particularly a challenge when even places where you could go to access the internet, like libraries or things like that, are closed to the public currently, and so that's not an option. So we've seen some nonprofits providing hotspots and in some cases even devices for people to participate to increase that access.
Learning curve is real, and for inclusive participation, we need to think upfront. What can we do for those people who don't engage very often, and how can we help them to become more comfortable with technology? I already mentioned some type of webinar, some type of orientation before the meeting, but what we've seen other solutions in the field where nonprofits actually work with their communities and teach them how to use technology, how to participate. So nonprofits, and I'm sure you guys are already doing that, but just sharing that with you.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, it could even be as simple as in your meeting invite or at the top of your agendas or things like that, having some really high level instructions on how to do it. Do they need to download something before the meeting to have access? Or, if there's a really easy step-by-step on, click the link, enter your code, that kind of thing can really help make it less intimidating for people. We've already talked a couple of times about language access and translation. but obviously that's very needed both in your meeting materials as well as the actual live meeting itself. So just be thinking through any needs that you have there. And again, the platforms that you're using have that option available.
Yes, and access to technology, it's a real thing. I mean, all these challenges, those are real things. Those are something that we, not just you, we all in California need to get creative and really figure out how can be creative in our communities, how can CBOs help us, what can we do to ensure that in this digital era, and which can be a hybrid and in person going forward, how can we ensure that our communities have equal access to participation? So access to technologies, again, we've seen nonprofits buying those. What we actually found that tablets, if we give participants, so it's a steering committee members, tablets to participate in those Zoom calls, those tablets are not very effective. So we've seen in the field, they had to switch to like some type of Chromebooks or little laptops because people could not participate on tablets on Zoom. It just was not intuitive enough.
Perfect. So Hannah is going to demonstrate another digital tool that's available to you. So I'm going to stop my screen share, Hannah, and turn it over to you.
Perfect. And this digital tool, this is something we just Googled on the fly. It's free. And when we've talked about burning questions, when we've talked about parking lot, when we've talked about getting all these different ideas from the group in the online environment, how do you manage it when you don't have chart papers, when you don't have the walls to place it on the wall, separate by topics? Some of the digital tools available out there are the sticky notes, which you create this, your wall with your chart papers, which you can move around. So what I'm demonstrating here with you today on this screen, we've got a couple questions. If we would have gotten more questions in the chat box, I would have organized it by themes. And perhaps if we got like 20 questions, clearly we don't have 20 question time to address 20 questions. But what we can do in this virtual environments, we can organize questions by theme and address this and provide answers, like general answers by themes versus to individual question. And this is another tool to demonstrate that you're hearing your participants, you're capturing their feedback, you're hearing their questions, and you're providing answers. So this is cute little tool. It's not like super intuitive, but it's free, and you can literally pull it on the fly in your meetings and create this either whiteboard thing and show after the meetings like, hey, this is what we've captured from the participants. We've heard you. This is a list of questions we got. We're gonna work on it. We're gonna get back to you. Things like that.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Pull the PowerPoint back up here real quick. So before we go into asking you to design your meeting, we're going to share a couple of examples with you using some different platforms and just a little bit about our thought process and how we landed on this meeting design. So this first example is one we actually did with you all earlier this year over the summer, and it was a Complete Communities workshop. And we ended up going with GoToWebinar. But before we even did any of this design work and started mapping out the agenda, we had a number of calls with the city to make sure we were clear on what the goals were, who the participants were going to be, what some of the potential concerns were that could come up or challenges that might come up, what they were comfortable sharing, how we needed to plug into the process as facilitators, and where you all were in the overall process. And so there had already been a number of engagement activities that had happened. This was essentially another chance to get a little bit of additional feedback from your community because there was a lot of potentially contentious things that were coming up in some of these initiatives around housing and transportation. So that you all wanted to give another opportunity to your community to engage before any of these initiatives move forward. So we did a lot of pre-work in terms of making sure we understood the goals and again, the input that was needed and the participants before we started mapping this out. And so with all of that information, we decided it was probably best due to the size of the likely attendance, because we ended up with almost 300 people on the line here. So due to the size of the attendance and then Also some concerns about some of the questions that might come in. We ended up going with GoToWebinar because again, we had a little bit more control with that in terms of how we monitored and moderated the questions and kept people quote on mute while we were presenting. So you see this agenda kind of mapped out here. We jumped on the line a half hour early to make sure we had all of the tech that was working, go over the meeting controls, make sure everything was ready to go. And if anybody jumped on this call early, you noticed that Hannah and I also were on a half hour early today to work out any last minute logistics. So that's just a good best practice we would recommend, to make sure you are on early and you can take care of any of those last minute logistical things. And then you see we had a welcome, we did some context setting, and then we kind of toggled between some polling using 2 different softwares and presentations. And then we had that moderated Q&A where our staff was monitoring things on the back end, grouping things. We also had a couple of quote canned questions that were FAQs that your team had identified for us that we knew would come up. And so that's something I usually do with presentations as well, is have those questions that you know are going to come up, have your speakers ready to address them so they're not caught off guard by any of that. And then we also talked about next steps in terms of what was going to happen with their feedback and where they were in the process before we signed off. Just a quick thing in terms of making sure you're ready for a plan B. I was actually running the tech on this workshop and my internet went down about 45 minutes before we went live on the presentation. So I had to run to work. Thankfully, I live close to our office and was able to connect to the internet there. But just a quick note to make sure that you're thinking through what could go wrong, not just with the attendees, but with your back end too.
Okay, the second example is a steering committee meeting that has been meeting for a while on Zoom platform. So everyone was pretty much familiar with the technology. So as you can see on our timing, we just spent like 10 minutes for intro and overview, very quick before we get into the nuts and bolts of the meeting. And as Melissa mentioned, we always log in early and we still invite individual participants to hop on the line a little early if they just got a new device and the Zoom is not working, so we can do this real-time troubleshooting before the meeting. What's interesting about this meeting design is it's your typical little bit of presentation, instructions for the breakout groups, all that jazz. But in this particular meeting, we've decided to use the social pinpoint tool, which is online mapping tool that hasn't been popular. The jurisdiction invested money in that tool, but people were not using it really. So we decided to use it in real time in small group exercise where people would provide a verbal feedback and the designated person, facilitator, will plug in that feedback into the tool in real time. And at the end of the meeting, there were online map from social pinpoint from feedback from 5 or 6 different groups. So not all, and people, the participants had an opportunity to see right away how their feedback was incorporated and what people, what the jurisdiction is doing with their feedback. And the result was a heat map, and natural individual feedback was part of the larger heat map. So this is just another idea for a meeting design for the groups.
And just really quickly here, and again, we'll send this out, but we just wanted to put up a couple of examples of in-person meetings as well and highlight a couple of things that often are done in in-person events that may or may not be able to be done in virtual meetings. Obviously, there's a networking component. So you see this pre-meeting interaction piece on meeting A, which is not as easy to do in a virtual environment. You see a gallery walk on there, which for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you'd have either maps or pictures or charts or visuals up on chart paper around the room, and just let people kind of self walk around and read and absorb information that way instead of it being a presentation. Tabletop discussions, you can kind of mimic that in a virtual environment with breakout groups, but it's not quite the same feel as a table level discussion in an in-person meeting. And then just quickly, lastly, you also see on meeting A that there's also a digital component there. So it's just a note to be thinking through digital pieces even when you are in an in-person environment. So with that, we are going to move into our next small group exercise. So just a couple of quick things here. We'll be working with the same scenarios in the same groups that we had yesterday. And really thinking through mapping out that meeting that we talked about in terms of we identified goals and participants and things like that yesterday. Today, we're really going to be working through what that meeting looks like, what are the components, what is the breakdown of presentations and questions, interactive exercises, other tools or things like that that you might be thinking. So make sure you're just thinking through the breadth of what might be needed in each of these meetings. Your facilitator for the group does have a template that you can use, or you can start with a blank piece of paper. We're not going to subscribe how you want to do this, but know that that template is available if you guys want to go that route. Hannah, do you want to talk about logistics?
Yes, same as yesterday. We're going to send you into breakout groups. You will have 20 minutes. Kim, thank you so much. She's going to be sending the reminders of the time remaining. And once we come back into the main session, we would like, just like yesterday, to hear from the groups what they came up with in terms of a meeting design. And you guys identified the goals, the desired level of input, the potential audience yesterday. So you have all this information. So now start thinking critically, how can you design an interactive, satisfactory, participatory meeting that meets your goals, but also inviting and satisfactory for participants.
We all set? And hopefully it should not kick you out this time. So I think I fixed that problem.
We'll live and learn.
There we go.
Hi, Kim. I had another meeting, but was able to log in.
Hi, sorry. Okay, good. I'm glad you were able to join. Let me see where I had you originally.
I was in group 6, I think, with Heidi.
6? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem.
I brought myself back.
How was it?
That's good. Good. Nice. Colette? She's like, why? Colette, is that face, why am I here?
Yes, I was like, am I the only one here or
No,
did
they're
I
all
get out?
coming back. It's automatic bring back after 2 minutes, but
Yeah.
if you
I
clicked
see.
on leave the breakout room, that's probably what happened.
Oops.
It's okay. How was your group discussion? I think it was good, right?
Very good, very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hannah, I'm gonna pass host to you
Yes.
because I'm gonna leave after this.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you.
Okay, welcome back.
Some of these groups may be sort of, anyway, but
Watching people coming back into the main session is the most fascinating thing to watch. It's pretty impressive. Can I get some reactions, digital reactions? How was that exercise? Good. Okay, looks like I've visited several groups and I've heard some excellent discussions. So let's hear from all of our groups. Some creative ideas have been flowing around, I know, and we're all gonna benefit from hearing these ideas. I'm gonna kindly ask you to mute yourself so we can minimize the background noise. And we're gonna share the report out slide with some guiding questions.
Thanks for the reminder, Hannah.
Okay, just like yesterday, each volunteer from one group will please start with what was your meeting, what was the goal of the meeting, and what tools and techniques did you choose to achieve your goals? Just quick reflection, do you think it's a right meeting design? How about we're gonna start with Mike's group.
Okay, yeah, we had a good discussion and filled out the agenda, and Nancy has volunteered to be our report out. So I will hand it over to Nancy. Thanks, Nancy.
Let's be clear, it was voluntold, but that's fine. Okay, so our goals for this meeting are to present the land use plan and identify potential issues with it for the hearing process, and also unofficially to start building a foundation for support of the land use plan. And so the techniques that we use is that we are anticipating, so this is a planning group meeting, so there's a fair amount of structure to it already, but that there would be a presentation by staff to go over the land use plan and some really high quality visuals of what the different land uses mean so people can understand what we're proposing in each area. And then we talked about breaking into small groups and having a mapping exercise where people could look at individual properties within these areas and identify if there's any properties that maybe don't seem consistent with the vision that we're putting out there. And then we would do like a report back on that. Prior to the meeting, we would do some online and a partner facilitated engagement in the same space where we would collect other input, and then we would present that input of what we collected in other avenues for outreach. And then our second interactive thing that we would do is do some polling based upon the input that we had previously collected to see if the planning group generally agrees or disagrees with the input that we had received from other avenues. And we felt like this was the right design because we really have to focus on more of a scalpel approach to the land use changes and not wholesale. And so we have to be really focused on what we're doing here based upon the constraints of the project. And we really recognize that the planning group is a small faction, but a powerful faction. So we wanted to bring in input from other channels and make the planning group aware of that input. And because they have some power, we wanted to see if that input that they collected from the community resonated with them. So they understand if we don't totally do what they say, that we're actually answering to multiple audiences. So that was our strategy.
Great, thank you, Nancy. This is very good and very smart strategy. Give yourself a round of applause. Planning group is important. You validate their power, their position, give them time to provide input, but also sharing what is larger community think, because at the end of the day, it's just not about one group. It's about larger community. Excellent, very good, guys. Carlos, I think your group also has community plan. What did you guys come up with?
I'm going to nominate Tanner to let you guys know.
I love that volunteering technique. Saves times in the meetings, FYI.
So we, again, this is for the Barrio Logan CPU kind of kickoff. So we decided on a 7 o'clock Zoom meeting. Obviously, we would get in early and make sure all the bugs are worked out. And then we would start off with a short presentation, kind of just not even a presentation, but just some dialogue on what to expect for the night and kind of the overall structure of the meeting, either provided by kind of a management level, or in our case, or possibly Vicky as the land use planning PM to provide an overview of that. And then second, provide kind of a Zoom tutorial, make sure that everybody understands who's involved, what they can do, how some of the tools that we might ask them to do, including how to involve the language services. And then before breaking into like a formal presentation, we wanted to get everybody active with a poll question. So probably do a couple poll questions, including who's at the meeting, are you a resident? Are you from the business industry, et cetera? And then kind of a poll question with trying to figure out how familiar people are with the overall planning process and just to make sure we understood who our audience was. And then after that, we would break into the actual kind of formal presentation on a PowerPoint, obviously trying to keep it as visual and entertaining as possible. And then after a formal presentation, break into some more interactive polling, maybe some dot voting exercises to gauge, the understanding or the feeling and of the information presented, just so we could make sure that we had that feedback.
This is great. Thank you. I like how you guys do polling like an icebreaker and get that interactivity going. And I like your ideas about understanding your audience and the level of familiarity with the subject. So one thing as you continue working through this meeting design is like, depending on the answers, do we have a plan B? What if people say we have no idea, never heard of the subject, not 90%? Do you adjust? Do you have a plan B to adjust to your polling results at the beginning? But overall, great job. Okay, let's move on. Who is next on our line? Let's maybe go with the group with our parks, complete communities. Heidi and Nicole's group. We'll start with Heidi's group.
Hi, Samira is going to be our reporter outer. So thank you, Samira.
Hi, everyone. So we're doing the parks master plan outreach. So at this point, we have 8 weeks to go back to council and have some more meetings to get the support that we need. And so we plan to have a 1 hour short meeting, and our objective is to educate and listen. So we plan to do like a GoToWebinar meeting, and our agenda is to have introductions, and we also plan to have an icebreaker to kind of make people feel comfortable to express their ideas and thoughts freely. And then our main item, we kind of plan to give an overview of where the project is at the moment and how much time we have to go back to council. We also don't anticipate, we're not going into this meeting thinking that we're going to make big changes. We are open to making some small edits and looking for potential changes possible. So we're going to use some interactive tools like polling and chat box and make sure that everyone is heard. And basically also from our experience, it looks like it's just kind of explaining and walking the audience through what we're proposing and just clearing out some questions that they might have to get their support. So that's our goal with this. And then we're just going to wrap it up. So we don't plan for a break because this is a 1 hour meeting. We plan to have some interactive tools like polling, chat box, and Q&As, and giving them an overview and then wrapping it up. Yep, that's our idea.
Great, thank you. Yes, great approach, great thinking. Icebreakers are always great, but again, know your audience, because if it's like a planning group meeting, they know each other. Perhaps they don't need icebreakers, but for this larger public meetings. It sounds like you guys thought how to keep it interactive and going and present plenty of information. Good job. Okay, Nicole's group.
Shannon, you want to take it away?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Shannon Mulderig here. So we had a similar plan to Samira's group, you know, to educate and listen mostly. So our goal is to have an informational webinar and to similarly to Samira's group, to not make any big changes, but really to just better understand the community's feedback and who's giving that feedback, to ultimately show council that we have put a good faith effort forward to engage the community. So we chose, you know, a midweek day from 6 to 7:30 for people to get off work and to attend the webinar. We would start with before the meeting starts, just a slide that goes over the technical and logistical information and who to contact if there's any troubleshooting that needs to happen. We would have our facilitator introduce the speakers of the night and, you know, the agenda. And we did want to do an icebreaker, but in a form of a poll, just because there will be so many people in the meeting, just to get an idea of who's in the room and to set the stage with a positive tone. Then our first agenda items would be to celebrate the achievements so far, you know, what work and outreach has been done so far, and then like a 5 to 10 minute lecture on, you know, what is the Parks Master Plan? Why is it important? Why do we need one? And then to do an interactive item, like a poll to, you know, get an idea of, you know, what's important to people when it comes to Parks and Recreation, and then get into more of the substantive and information items about, you know, diving into the elements and then asking questions and then incorporating a variety of different engagement tools, whether that's, you know, putting stars on the board with, you know, different renderings that we show, or, you know, a Mentimeter poll that shows like live results. And then we plan to wrap up and summarize what was discussed and talk about next steps and conclude the meeting.
Excellent, excellent. I like the innovative idea of having this having the Zoom control slide right away, so people who are logging in early can start like working through some tech issues if needed, and the contact person. This is excellent ideas, and I like how you guys think, how can we make this meeting interactive? How can we have an icebreaker? How can we have mix of informative and activities? Good job. Okay, last but not least, we have 2 more groups to go, and let's go with Melissa's group first, and then Julie.
We were actually talking about who was going to report out when we got pulled back into the main channel, so I don't have an explicit person to report out. Do we have any volunteers? Melissa or Alfonso, anybody feel comfortable?
It's fine. I'll do it. This is Alex.
Thank you for taking me for the team, Alex.
Yeah. So our scenario is TPA, single family rezone, essentially. I guess it's an opt-in program. If you do affordable housing, you get density bonus. That's our scenario. Our meeting 6 to 8, Zoom. We have introduction, an icebreaker, and maybe we'll, have somebody open, either our planning director or the mayor. And we, following the introduction, we have setting the stage or some background. So this is a highly controversial item. So we've completed some initial interviews with major stakeholders. So give some backgrounds, the crisis related to housing unaffordability. 54% of our residential zoning is single family. And following that, we'll have a quick polling that's very structured, non-open-ended, and just to gauge the temperature in the room and some of the solutions that's going to be proposed. And after that, there's a quick break, and then we have neutral stakeholder or neutral presenter, maybe from the housing, Affordable Housing Federation or something, to talk about the challenge facing, the story of why we need this solution. And then following that, we have a quick presentation on the actual proposal, high level overview, and then into the breakout group for a discussion on, what the strategies could be to, first of all, is this proposal, feasibility proposal, it was strategy for kind of larger rollout in the community, and then report back, and then the next step. And I think that's it.
Yeah, excellent, great. Some of the details that stood out for me right away. The mutual presenter, great idea. So make sure we're not like setting up fires with certain people in the room. It's a neutral presenter. I like the idea of kind of like setting the stage with maybe some type of reality check. This is what it is. This is what we're dealing with. All good idea. Sounds like your meeting flow is good. It's interactive. It's a mix of different activities. And you guys even thought about the survey, how structured it should be. Excellent. Overall, excellent thinking process. Okay, last but not least, we have Julia's group.
Michael is presenting for us, so I'll kick it over to him.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, so just as a quick recap, sort of to build on what Alex said, the key component of the project is to identify opportunities for multifamily housing within single-family zoning citywide that is within transit priority areas. So before, and our goal was to have basically a community-wide kickoff that anybody in the city could attend. And we felt it was important to provide some upfront work and education to the community as a whole through the project website. We would specifically utilize the story maps function, which has interactive mapping basically to show what areas of the city this would apply to, and provide some information within that to basically identify why we are doing what we're doing, like what is the goals and policies and the legislative intent of the program we're looking to implement. Then within that, we also want to provide a clear structure as to what the community has a say on and what they don't have a say on, so that when they do provide their feedback, it's structured in a way that they understand where their opportunities are to engage and where we know that we have to move forward with certain sort of major items. We would also have a video map from either the project lead or planning department director sort of introing the story maps and basically having that on the website for people to view in advance. At the meetings itself, the goal was to use a virtual open house using Remo, rather than sort of having one particular time. Given the fact that this is citywide, it would be several times a week at different times of day, so to really catch as many people as possible. And then we would have multiple facilitators at each table, and the Remo tool allows you to have sort of individual tables where you can have breakout. Each table would start with an icebreaker or softball question, just to make sure that everybody there is engaged and sort of paying attention and sort of and interacting. And then attendees could also jump from table to table as we get into this, and facilitators will be able to take notes either using either the Mural, the Notely, or the Miro tool, on that component. And then we would sort of essentially consolidate all of that information and then report that back at sort of regular intervals, perhaps every half hour. And then, ultimately from that culminate into sort of what's overall that we heard, and then posting that on the website for future consideration and next steps. So
great, thank you. Love the elements of setting the structure and managing the expectations for community engagement and participation. This is the feedback what type of feedback do we need from you? How are we going to use it? And definitely closing this communication and dialogue loop with community by posting it on the website and saying, this is what we've heard from the community and this is how we're going to use it. And of course, Rima, great tool. We haven't used it personally, but allows for this flexibility for participation and based on interest and topics, really great participant experience. Okay, well, let's give each other a round of virtual applause. 6 different meetings, 6 different ideas. As you can see from this exercise and from the report out, your meeting design can go all different ways. But at the end of the day, if you're clear on your goals and level of input desired and how you're going to use your input and based on your audience, you can come up with all the different meeting designs. One thing, even though we emphasize interactivity of the meeting and we introduced you to tons of different digital tools and we modeled, maybe over modeled a variety of techniques, just be a little bit more intentional. You don't have to have all these techniques in the meeting. It's gonna, it depending on the meeting. Like, let's not make it like extra interactive. That's what we're doing with this training. We're making it extra interactive so we can model everything we possibly can in a short time. But when it comes to your public meetings, just, be intentional, like which techniques to use, which techniques not to use. Let's not overuse it, especially if we don't need it. Okay, Melissa, I'm gonna get back to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Hannah. And thank you everybody for sharing and participating in the small groups. Hopefully it's a good exercise for you to think through some of the different approaches and tools that you can use as you move into more virtual engagement. So we're gonna spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about facilitation. We're gonna start with a kind of a high level overview here. And then we're gonna talk through some of the challenges that might come up and some tips on how to navigate some of those issues in your meeting. So I'm not going to read this. I'm pretty sure everybody on the line knows what a facilitator is, but essentially that person is in charge of the process and structure of the meeting and keeping things going. So just some things to think about as you're preparing, if you're facilitating a meeting, thinking about the timing. So that was part of the exercise we just did, making sure that you know how long the presentations are going to be, how long some of your exercises might take, how long do you need for breakouts versus report outs. Or polling or things like that. So just making sure you're mapping out the timing. Again, thinking about the learning styles and so having different ways for participants to engage. Think through your talking points if you're going to be the one presenting or if you're leading large group discussions. So just think about what you might say or how you might structure your presentation. And then obviously the logistics. Hannah and I spent a lot of time doing this on the back end, thinking about your roles and responsibilities, any materials you need, the technology, and as we've talked about a couple of times, a plan B in terms of things that might come up. Particularly, I think important in an online environment, tech can go awry very easily. So I really appreciated the group that was thinking through the contact person for tech issues. So that's a really good best practice to be thinking of. Have somebody that's really helping on the back end, helping people navigate any tech issues that come up or helping troubleshoot as needed. So this is just really high level things you should be thinking about as a facilitator as you're developing your facilitation plan, your agenda, and your plan for the meeting.
Okay, so how can you achieve all these goals? So we've heard some meeting designs from you guys, but clearly those meeting designs in terms of prep will have to be fleshed out more. What we would like to do, we like to flesh out our meeting designs by the minute. But we definitely think about timing, overall timing. What are we going to be doing in each section and activity? This is the example actually of our internal facilitation plan, how we approach it. As you can see, there's time, item, and activity on our facilitation plan. There's corresponding slide numbers, who is responsible for this section, what type of messaging we're doing, or what are we going to be high level talking about. And definitely when there's several people on your team facilitating the particular meeting, logistics is the most important one because everyone knows what they're doing. Like here you can see Melissa is in charge of sharing her screen, advancing slides, Nicole is doing Q&A, Carl is monitoring chat box. So basically your team member knows what they're doing. So this is just ILG's internal plan, and we're going to upload it on the Google Drive for you guys to take a look at for the complete communities workshops that we did back in July. But there's actually other tools. When we were preparing for this training, it was like, wait, is there any other tools in terms of the facilitation plans? And I came across this Session Lab website. I don't know if you guys heard of it or not. Not only they have some type of interactive facilitation plans where people can collaborate online, kind of like Google Docs style, but what's cool about those facilitation plans is you can move whole chunks of sections and it's automatically changes timing. And what's cool about that website, and I just started to exploring myself, it has a lot of meeting design ideas and techniques, especially for those of you who are like just getting introduced to meeting design. It's like, I don't know what to use. That website has a wealth of information. So we're gonna play just a 1-minute video because I feel like that video explains better than I do how cool their facilitation plans are. And again, this is just another tool, another idea for you to use. Okay, so Melissa, I don't know if I'm doing this right, but let's see if you can hear my audio.
I can see it.
How do you prepare your facilitation plan?
Yes, okay.
And for your workshops or training sessions? Spreadsheets, scribbles, dozens of emails with attachments. It's time for something better, something easier, something smarter. Meet Session Lab, the dynamic way to design your facilitation plan, collaborate, and save time and efforts throughout your session preparations. Welcome to the Planner tool, where you can see your facilitation plan. Each block is one module of your workshop, and color-coded categories help you to get a quick overview of the interaction and style of your session. Easily rearrange your session plan. Just drag and drop your modules and your timing stays correct. Find any piece of content that you or your colleagues created earlier and seamlessly reuse them together with related attachments and evaluation comments. You can also invite your colleagues to work together with you or your client to review the plan. Spare the hassle of version control and emailing spreadsheets. What's more, you get a consistent and professional planning format to use in your team. And create beautiful looking printouts with a click. There are many more features waiting for you. Public library of facilitation methods to give you inspiration. Private repositories to have a shared knowledge base for your team. And creating session evaluations. You can access Session Lab in the cloud anytime from any device. Your documents are safe and you decide who to share them with. If you need a simple way to manage your facilitation preparations, Session Lab is for you. Sign up and get started with Session Lab.
Okay. So you can see their plans are more beautiful. It's color coded, and just check it out. See if that's for you, and if not, just good old fashioned Google Doc is another way to go. But again, what those facilitation plans allows, and we highly encourage to map out your meeting. They allow you for critical thinking. What if plan A, plan B, who's doing what? So when you guys when you run your meetings, you run it smoothly and everything is on track. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Melissa.
Great. So this next section we're going to go into is talking about some of the things that might come up. And some of these are obviously more applicable to in-person meetings. So we just wanted to give you some tips or tricks to help address these if you encounter them in your meeting. So this first one, in terms of sidebar conversations, this is obviously more applicable to in-person meetings, but we've all been in that meeting where you have 2 or 3 people that are talking offline. So here's a few things that you can think about in terms of keeping things on track in that regard. Just have a verbal reminder that we have this many minutes left in the presentation, and then we'll have time for Q&A. You can be a little bit more direct and just really target and say, we're just having one conversation right now. You'll have time to network or to talk offline later. Or you could really, really target and call the person out who's speaking. So you see the example there, Jose, I can see you have something to contribute. When the speaker is finished, I'll put you in the queue. A physical way you can do this if you're in person that I've done in meetings is you can just literally go stand by the person, and it might make them feel uncomfortable if they're having an offline conversation and the facilitator is then standing behind them or standing next to them. They might quiet down a little bit. So just a few tips in terms of dampening sidebar conversations so that you can keep your meeting on track and keep all of your attendees focused. Staying on time, that's obviously a huge one. So if you're having off-topic conversation, this is where the parking lot would come into play. So either have a flip chart at the ready, or some of the digital tools we talked about in terms of capturing those things, or even verbally saying, again, you've raised an important issue, we're gonna put that on the parking lot, or we're going to keep track of that for a future meeting. Or if it is something that's on the agenda later, you can definitely just flag that and say, we're talking about this right now, please hold your thought, we'll have time to discuss that topic a little bit later. And then again, to Hannah's point, having a plan B, sometimes conversations go on a little bit longer than you plan. So as a facilitator, make sure you have something in your back pocket about where you might have wiggle room in your timing that you can get some time back.
Okay, never-ending discussions. How many of you experienced never-ending discussions? So I'm not going to read everything from this PowerPoint slide. You guys can look at this after the meeting, but what I want to emphasize, there's some tips and tricks you can kind of manage never-ending discussions. Definitely emphasizing how much time we have for this agenda item. In the middle of the conversations, just putting discussion on pause and saying, hey, just a friendly reminder, we're going to spend 5 more minutes on this agenda items. We're going to take 2 more comments on this agenda item, and then we're going to move on. And this is some of the ways to manage those never-ending discussions.
I'm sure this is something that has come up in your meetings, especially as you're talking about some of these controversial topics. You definitely can have challenging or emotional participants that that may be in your meeting. So again, we aren't going to read this, but just think about some of these things. Some of these things that can help in terms of using a neutral facilitator. If things are really getting out of hand, pausing or taking a break, and you can have a one-on-one conversation with that person. I know this is hard, but try to not take things personally and respond to the substance of the question instead of maybe the tone or the emotion behind it. And then we can answer questions on this front if you have any, but there's a lot of meeting design techniques that can limit the grandstanding or that not giving that person that platform or the microphone to do that, whether that's small groups or stations or things like that. Just think through the design of your meeting in ways to limit people taking over and having that platform to be that grandstander or that person. And then also just a quick note that when you're preparing for your meeting, there's also things that you can do to help head that off. Make sure that you have all the background information. Be clear about the process and how the final decisions are going to be made and what you're going to be doing with their comments. Having a broad spectrum of viewpoints from your presenters. So this came up in my small group about having a neutral person from a CBO come and talk about affordable housing and the crisis that San Diego is facing. But also having a broad spectrum of those viewpoints so that they feel that their viewpoint is heard and part of that process.
Okay, facilitative listening techniques is one of the most important tools for the facilitators, for people leading the meeting, to ensure that you hear and validate all points of view, no matter what others saying and with what tone. Some of the techniques that you can use is definitely focusing not maybe on the subject, but definitely acknowledging the feelings. People can say something like, I cannot believe city is doing XYZ on this project. Some of the responses, instead of just like saying, thank you for your comment, because that doesn't do anything for that participant, you can say, I hear that you're very upset about this project. Tell me more. And invite this additional dialogue if time allows. People can say, you know what, how come you guys cannot incorporate health outcomes? Why you're doing all this work, spending all this money, and we just don't know how does it impact the health of our community? Comments like this, how do you respond? We can always say, thank you for sharing. I hear that this is a very important issue for you, and I hear you, and it's noted. So things like this. Empathize. It's another technique, legitimizing feelings. It's like, I cannot believe you're building this right next to my house and you're not building it with no parking spaces, you know, things like this, with a lot of this different, like aggressive, upsetting tones. We hear that all the time. Again, something you can say, empathize with the feelings, legitimize their feelings. They're legitimately upset. We can say, okay, thank you for sharing. I hear that is really bothers you and it's quite upsetting. And again, balancing all this diverse perspective, opinions. Some are sad, some are like angry, comments that like make your meetings uneasy. So include other perspectives in those conversations. Draw people out and say it's like anyone else who hadn't had a chance to speak. Anyone else has a different way of looking at these issues, to kind of like broadening your conversation in the meeting. Some of the facilitative listening skills that you can use, especially for managing those meetings, and the source for these skills is Sam Kainer, Facilitator's Guide to losing my English here, you guys. Okay, the source is on the bottom of the slide. He has way more techniques. Check out his book. It's great.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. We wanted to use the next few minutes to let you all kind of try this. So we have some scenarios here, and we just want to have some brainstorming sessions about how you as facilitators might handle this if these come up in your public meetings. So we're gonna put up the first scenario here.
Someone who has a chance to volunteer yet, who hasn't spoken out today or yesterday in a large group settings, can we have that person read the scenario up loud, please?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Tara Ashreynolds speaking.
Thanks, Tara.
Two people attending the meeting, Jesse and Kim, have a history of not getting along well. Jesse is presenting a proposal at this meeting. During clarifying questions, Kim puts out a question with a sharp tone, one that clearly has an edge to it. Jesse answers the question, you think with some discomfort. What's your response?
And that's the question for the group. What's your response? And we have a couple people unmuting yourself and sharing how would you respond? And there's no wrong or right answer here. We're all learning together.
You can think back to what Hannah was just talking about in terms of active listening and some of the emotional pieces there and the empathizing. Any thoughts on how you might respond?
I have a couple of thoughts. I think one thing you can always do is kind of repeat back to them, like what I hear from you, Kim, is that like you're concerned with X. And what I hear from you, Jesse, is that, you know, this is how you think we should approach the project. And then maybe turn it like to the larger group of like, are other people also concerned with this? Or like, do other people want to discuss this topic, so that it's not so directly focused on the two of them, but it becomes maybe more of like a discussion than two people at each other.
This is great approach, Julia, because what you're saying, you're paraphrasing, but with a different tone, with more neutral tone. And in this way, Jesse and Kim can hear the same points, but because the tone is neutral, they're going to hear it a little bit differently. So this is excellent. And I saw Nate was unmuting himself. Nate, do you have ideas? How would you respond?
Yeah, it was honestly, I didn't, similar to what Julia said, but really I was just going to say I would start by thanking both of them for you know, giving a presentation and asking questions and being engaged, and just show that, you know, we hear them.
Yeah, this is good too. You're validating that you're here, you're listening, and excellent. Melissa, should we take one more comment to move on to the next?
Is there another quick comment? If not, we've got another scenario that we can put up and talk through a little bit. Okay. So for this one, why don't you all just take a minute here to read it to yourself. We'll do some individual reading here, and then we will ask for responses. Any initial thoughts on this one? So you've got somebody wanting to add time to the agenda.
Yeah, most of our meetings are controlled by the Brown Act, and you can't just modify the agenda like that. So we would just, if the community planners asked to step in, we would point out to the rules of the Brown Act and that you just can't do that.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, making sure you're clear about the legal rules that are that ground your meeting. You definitely can't talk about non-agendized items if your meeting is subject to the Brown Act. If you're thinking about this in a little bit broader context about a community meeting, though, and somebody wants to extend an agenda item, any thoughts in that scenario?
Nate, again, I'll speak up quickly. I think maybe you could just note that there's a lot to get through in the meeting, and that the agenda is relatively full, and that folks are attending the meeting to hear what's on the agenda as it exists, sort of. So I would offer to discuss what they're concerned with later after hours, to hear them later.
No, that's great. Thanks, Nate. Offering to have the conversation offline or make sure that their concerns are heard outside of the meeting is definitely one approach. Something else to think about here is you could also put this back to the group and ask them. So see if there's a consensus around spending additional time on that meeting agenda item, and talk about the trade-offs that would be involved there. Would you then want to extend the meeting, or would you need to hold another item over to another meeting, or schedule another meeting to talk through that thing, that agenda item? So this way you're getting kind of buy-in from the group too. So a lot of different options there, but thank you for your comments. And Nancy, very great point about the Brown Act and the legal implications on some of this. That's very important to be thinking through in terms of public meetings, especially meetings if you have elected officials there or anything that is that does trigger the Brown Act requirements. All right, any other thoughts on this scenario before we kind of go into wrapping things up?
Quick thoughts, and that happened to us in real life. If you have guest speakers and a community is like, we want to spend like an hour on this agenda item, but we do have invited guest speakers, we definitely pointed out, we can skip this and this agenda item, but because there's guest speakers, we would like to honor the time of people attending this meeting and presenting. But lots of thinking on the fly, for sure.
And some of these things, why we bring this up too, is it's just good to think through some of these things that might come up. And so you have a plan of how to respond instead of being caught off guard by some of these things that come up not infrequently in public meetings. So thank you for participating and thinking through these scenarios with us. We have one more that we don't have time to get to, unfortunately, today. So I'm going to skip over that slide, but we'll send that out to you today, and we're going to move into some wrap up unless there's any quick clarifying questions before we start to close things out. Carly or Nicole, are we seeing any questions?
No questions at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, Hannah?
Okay, so takeaways, day 2. Successful meetings always start with a really, really good facilitation plan. Map it out, think about what if scenarios and plan B scenarios. So you're prepared. And things can go sideways. You can think about plan A, plan B, and the situation C may arise, and just it is what it is. Structured participation opportunities to accommodate learning styles. help to ensure quality participation. And what do we mean by quality participations? People hopefully will come back and participate again and provide quality feedback, informed input. Words matter. Listening techniques really help to find right words and honor all opinions. And we don't have to agree on what people think, but we can definitely acknowledge their feelings and where they're coming from, and that makes a huge difference. And there are a lot of meeting design options. We've heard 6 different meeting design options for 3 case scenarios. So, but again, meeting design will likely determine the success of your meeting.
Thanks, Hannah. So we were going to do a round robin and have everybody share like we did to start the meeting. But since we're running a little short on time, I'm wondering if we could just have a few volunteers answer this question for us. So we've discussed a lot of technique, a lot of tools over the last couple of days, and we're just curious if there's anything that we've talked about or anything else that you've heard of that you're really excited to try in an upcoming public meeting or community engagement process. So we'd love to hear from maybe 3 or 4 of you about anything that you're excited to try. Do we have any volunteers?
Someone perhaps we haven't heard from on this larger group line. If you can unmute yourself and share, please.
So this is
Okay, I see Alejandra and then Jonathan. Alejandra,
okay.
go first.
Yeah, so one of my advisory boards needs energy. So I'm really excited to try some of the tools with them because they're very, very quiet since we're doing some meetings. And I'm happy to attend this meeting and learn some of these tools.
Great.
Thank you.
So much. Jonathan, you're next. And if I can have two volunteers raise your hands so I know who's going next. Jonathan?
So I can't use this technique in a meeting, but I find it really interesting about partnering with an internet service provider to make sure that there's connectivity for people that don't have access to the internet, or providing like Google Chromebooks, like you said. Like, how do we get that technology out to the people that need it? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I don't see any blue hands for people who would like to volunteer next, but we'll take 2 more comments. Please unmute yourself and share. I love the energy in this public engagement training. No one's want to be engaged.
This is Tanner. So I think Alejandra mentioned it, but getting an idea of some of those the tools that I think I really enjoyed that SIFT tool example yesterday, and I think maybe then specifically using it for kind of like the early softball question to get the engagement going. I thought that was a really good idea. So that is something that stuck out to me, and I guess I would be especially excited to try that in the future.
Thank you. Do we have one more thought before we move into kind of our closeout and evaluation? Okay. All right, we won't volunteer people on this front, but we hope that you've either experienced some tools over the last couple of days or techniques that you will implement in your public meetings as you move forward. So as wrap up, like we did yesterday, we're going to share kind of the behind the curtain of some of the tools and techniques that we use today. We're going to do a really quick evaluation through Meeting SIFT again, and then just share some additional resources that we have at ILG that might be helpful to you all as you continue to plan for your public engagement approaches and meetings.
Okay, just like yesterday, we used small groups exercise and report out. We used a large group exercise with the scenarios, and we asked you to share with us your thoughts and ideas. We did a learning style assessment today. We used, again, a mix of lecture and activities. We introduced or showcased Zoom instant polling. We're gonna do evaluation of this training just in a moment. We use chat box for questions and anything you would like to share, including some destinations to the Christmas lights displays in San Diego. We did some burning questions at the beginning to make sure we're addressing questions that you have from day one. We used visuals and handouts. Actually, the facilitator template, facilitation meeting template is on the G Drive. You can double check, it's excellent template. And again, we ensured we're using multiple voices. Melissa and I were very intentional, making sure one voice is not dominating, and we went like back and forth. So, and I hope we kept you guys awake with that. That was intentional, and we tried to bring your voices into the conversations as well.
Okay, so with that, we are going to do a quick evaluation. We've got about 3 questions for you guys. So we still promise to get you out of here on time, but if you can go back to the meeting SIFT URL that we used yesterday, you see it on the screen there, sift.ly, and enter that participant code. We have a few questions for you all. Let me get this. Okay, I'm going to pull this over here. Hopefully you guys can now see my browser window.
Yes, we can see that, Melissa.
Okay, and I see a few people connecting already, so we'll give this just another minute or so.
Melissa, we're launching the first question.
I was waiting for people to connect, but as we did yesterday, I will go ahead and launch this first question, but if you're still trying to connect, again, the URL and participant code will stay on the top right-hand side of your screen. So you will still be able to connect if you're working on that. But for this first question, we're hoping that you can just rate the different elements of the training for us. What did you find especially helpful, or what was maybe not helpful that we should consider not using in the future?
And please be honest. This is a great.
Anonymous. Yeah. we don't know who you are, so yeah, please be honest about what was helpful and what was not.
We're learning from you. What can we do better next time? So thank you for your feedback.
I got it.
And just like yesterday, obviously you're seeing these adjust as more people participate, and it averages out your ratings for us. 75% of you have participated, so we'll give this just another minute. So just a note about this software on the back end. So I have another screen that you guys can't see, that's the facilitator screen. And it tells me how many people are connected, how many people have responded. So it's a nice way to be able to track your participation rates. But again, it's anonymous, so I don't know who has participated and who hasn't. But you can get a really good sense of how many people have responded, so you know how much longer to leave things open. So we're just about at 100% here. So you see the results there. Hannah, do you want to talk through any of that?
Yes, just thank you for sharing, guys. And yeah, we appreciate your feedback.
All right, just a couple more questions, a couple open-ended questions for you to share additional feedback with us. Is there anything that we can provide you as follow-up? Obviously, we've noted a few things that we'll share after the fact, including the recording and the slide deck, some sample facilitation plans, things like that. But is there anything else that we can help with, or that you'd like us to send you, or anything as follow-up that would be needed? That's a really good one. Free tools versus paid tools.
There's virtual and no free tools. Everything is, there's trial versions, that's about it. Yes, we'll upload templates for the meeting facilitation plan online on the Google Drive. Pricing of tools, we can share some of the pricing of tools. We don't know them all. It's really hard to get the pricing out of those companies because they want to talk to you individually for 30 minutes before revealing the price, but we have some pricing we can share.
And on that front too, some of it is varied pricing. So some of it depends on the kind of the size of the jurisdiction. Some of it, like meetings that we talked about yesterday, depends on how many access points you want to have. So there's a varied pricing on some of them as well.
We share what we know, and the rest, give them a call.
Yeah. Anything else here before we go into the final question? Give this another minute.
I think we're ready for the final, Melissa.
Okay.
12:01.
Just as anything else you want to share with us? Anything that you really liked? Again, anything that you need from us? Anything that you're like, I don't know why you guys did this section, it wasn't helpful, or rethink this exercise, or anything like that. Just any really open-ended, anything you want to share with us before we close out. We always appreciate the thank you. Yeah. Okay. Not seeing a lot come in here, so we'll go ahead and close this out. But again, we'll share our contact information with you guys at the end here as a reminder. And so feel free to follow up with us if you have questions or comments or anything comes up after we close out the training. Just a couple of really quick things for you all in terms of some additional resources that are all free on our website. We have a whole toolkit dedicated to housing and public engagement. We know this is going to be really key as you guys work through RHNA numbers and allocations and things like that. So we've got some tips there that we worked with and launched last year. We have a lot of resources related to language access and engaging beyond the usuals. For those of you that participated in the TIERS training last year, the whole framework is on our website, including all of the templates, so that is accessible to you all. And then that bottom link is just all of our general public engagement space on our website that has a lot of free written resources for you all. Feel free to stay in contact with us on social media or sign up for our newsletter. This is how we share upcoming trainings and opportunities, as well as new resources and other things that are of interest to our local government partners. So please connect with us in those ways if you're interested in hearing more from us in the future. And then I'll just go ahead and put up our contact information here and see if anybody else on the team has any closing thoughts before we let you guys go.
I just wanted to say thank you to the ILG team. This was really fun, and I think that we're excited about developing our engagement programs now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Great. I just wanted to thank my ILG team for all of the hard work they did, and thank the San Diego team for your input in helping create this training as well. And thank you all again for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy time of the year. So thanks to all.
Thank you, guys.
Echo Carly's thank you to all of you for attending and spending 2 mornings with us. We know there's a lot going on, so just thank you to all of the attendees.
We're officially done.
All right, well, have a great afternoon, everyone, and happy holidays. And hopefully we'll stay in contact with all of you.
Thanks all.
Great. Thank you.
Bye. It's always interesting to, recording. Let's stop recording. It's me. Stop.